Happy Sunday, Collective. I wanted to check in and see how everybody's experience this weekend under the full lunar eclipse in Taurus treated you. As I have alluded to in some other videos, this full moon was ruled by Venus, which is currently in Virgo, but focusing on the energy of Venus and what areas of life that generally highlights, specifically in term when you consider the presence of the moon in Taurus in proximity to Jupiter, which I covered the energy of Jupiter in a video earlier this week. In a sign ruled by Venus, we are necessarily confronted with considering what is valuable to us, what our value is, what is important to us in this world. And sometimes that is an uncomfortable thing to consider, because we often find that what we value, it's good and bad. It tends to go beyond the material. It tends to go beyond the money that we make or the money that we have or the possessions that we have. It's a double-edged sword, right? I mean, because when you tie your identity so closely to those things, there can be some serious consequences to your sense of equilibrium and your sense of purpose when there's change in your financial position, or there's a change in your material possessions, or when circumstances happen beyond your control that tend to make you feel like your value is linked to the money that you have, or the money that you can provide, or the goods that you can provide, the material value that you add. And maybe internally, you've always felt that your value was something more. Your value was something that couldn't be measured under those calculations. And so I wanted to spend a moment tonight just to point out the card that I have at the foreground of the shot. You can see, now you might have to look it up online to get a better view of the imagery, but it's the High Priestess card. And the High Priestess card, it's the second one of the major arcana, so the numerology of it is representative of duality and balance and harmony. That's what twos represent in numerology. And I wanted to talk specifically about this card for a second, just because today is the 29th, and I have mentioned briefly before how numerology, all numbers generally reduce to a number between 1 and 9. So you add up 2 and 9, you get 11, and then you add those two, and then that reduces to 2. So then that brings us to our High Priestess, and it's a quite it's appropriate for more than one reason aside from just what today's date is. But having just come off of this lunar eclipse and the symbolism in the card, she represents the inner knowing, the intuition within us all. So there's no gender in tarot. Doesn't matter if you're man, woman, male, female, whatever. The High Priestess is within each of us. She represents that divine feminine energy, that sort of inner voice that you have, that you commonly call your gut feeling, your intuition, yes, but it's the knowing without really knowing specifically why. It's that part of you that sometimes it becomes easier to squash down, because the external reality of your life in the material world makes you realize that there's something out of alignment. it can become hard to reconcile what the high priestess in you is saying versus what your intellect and your left brain and your observable reality is telling you. So I just wanted to and I think I had talked about this in the last video that I did, where I talked about the difference between therapeutic horticulture, horticultural therapy, and the value of looping in these archetypes and these discussions of these unseen energies, and how I think that a big part of repairing our relationship with ourselves is coming back to a balance, much like you see the high priestess sitting in between the two pillars. On the card, there's a white pillar and a black pillar. I forget what the letters stand for. They stand for something. Each one stands for a specific term, but they essentially represent the pillars at Solomon's temple. Uh, and so they represent the duality of nature themselves, the masculine and the feminine, the good, evil, the negative and positive, the yin and the yang, basically. The high priestess herself, sitting in between these two pillars, is essentially a third pillar. She represents the path between. She sits in perfect balance between these two energies. And in the background, there's a tapestry, which is interesting because I talk about a tapestry in the Thoughts on Grief and Mourning video. But the tapestry itself, it has pomegranates on it, and that represents fertility and just feminine energy, femininity itself. And the tapestry is obscuring a body of water behind her. So again, if you look this up online, get a closer look. It's a nighttime scene, so she is sitting in the darkness. Her very nature sits in darkness. She sits among among the unseen energies, and comfortably she sits in perfect balance, and she is faced away. The tapestry is obscuring the water, which is emotions in tarot, because she doesn't need to see it. She just knows it's there. She doesn't need to see to know. Um, and so she sits there. She's got the crescent moon at her feet, but her headdress even is a representative, just the shape of it. It's representative of all the phases of the moon. Like you've got the waning in, the waxing crescent, and then of course the full moon in the center of the headdress. So she sits there in this perfect divine feminine balance in between the duality of nature that we all live in. And she essentially is representative of that balance that we're all asked to hold between intuition and intellect and the conscious mind. And that the pace of our reality now that we live in often um, weighs heavily in favor of the intellect and conscious mind side at the expense of our intuition, despite the intuition being so instrumental, especially when you're in new circumstances, especially when there's no archetype that you have to readily pull from, or say you're not familiar with archetypes. Your walk of experience might be one to where your path has been pretty clear cut and things have generally worked out for you, and that's great. But then sometimes you're asked to look a little bit beyond the scope of your life as you've experienced so far, and sometimes you're left really grasping, looking for answers, and you don't, you're almost like, what's another way I can look at this? I need another angle to look at this from. And want to I want to let everyone out there know that if you find yourself at this point to where you feel that you're out of alignment, and you feel that you're being pulled in a direction that seems at odds with what the left brain, with the rational person in your position should, quote unquote, be doing, and what the obvious thing to do is, um yet here you are feeling at odds, like something inside is tugging. I just think maybe you should maybe write it down, and sit there and sort of meditate on what actually is that voice saying, and what in your life can maybe be changed, rearranged, altered. Not everything has to be a total upheaval, um, to maybe make you feel a little bit more in alignment. And then um, asking yourself if that still leaves you with some unresolved feelings when it comes to value and your place in the world and your purpose. And if you feel that your current life circumstances are allowing you to sit in a place to where you feel that the things are important to you, the things that you add, contribute, the value that you bring are properly recognized and allowed to flourish. And I wanted to, bring in just, I talked about in my first Fireside reflection video before I had a mic and before you could really hear very well, is I'm about to beef up the fire, so just bear with me here. I had talked about how I endured a lot of feelings of loneliness last year, and despite not being alone, despite not living alone. And the loneliness, of course, was my inner high priestess doing what it is that she's supposed to do. And me, of course, wanting, actually, very much so, to gaslight myself more than anything. Um, I did my very best to try to quiet her right up, but still she was there. Like, and that's the thing that I sit with a lot these days, because I'm so grateful, number one, but it's actually what made my life so hard last year, is because, as a few friends who were sort of there to watch the troubles unfold, they they knew they knew that there were things going on, and that, like, I didn't understand why I was being treated the way I was being treated. I didn't, but I was the first one to make up, like, oh, he's got a lot going on at work. He's got a lot of new things, and um, I need to figure out a way to suck it up. I need to figure out how this, yeah, he could be doing better in terms of how he's managing it, but don't be ungrateful. He's making the money, and you just don't be paranoid, because, again, despite always having good intuition, that's always been true about me, I was just so quick to entertain every thought um, that would all lead back to me being the problem, because that was way easier. That was way more in alignment with the left brain side of life, with the intellect. And it's like, well, maybe I'm just feeling, I don't know. It was like contorting myself to make myself the problem. It's really frightening in hindsight. But it was like the whole time my intellect was spot on, or I'm sorry, my intuition was spot on. And the problem was the person that, my intellect told me that if you're with someone for over 15 years and they really want out of a relationship with you, um, the intellect in me said, well, if you confront this person and specifically ask, is there something going on with your assistant? And you specifically ask, then again, the rational mind would say, oh, well, you've essentially given that person an off ramp. They will answer you truthfully, because, at that point, if they're hesitant because they don't want to hurt your feelings or this or that, at least you have said the words for them. Is that an ideal way for things to end? No, but I mean, before things go too far and you start engaging in an affair, I mean, isn't that the ideal scenario, right? Your significant other is just so intuitive that they just they serve you the words on a silver platter, and all you have to do is nod. So that's what I did. I did that probably about 5 different times I can recall, actually, in the year 2022. And each time, my fiance just denied it like tooth and nail. It was like, and then, it wasn't just denying, it was like gaslighting me, like making me feel crazy, making me feel like a burden for even bringing this up, a burden for even, which of course then makes me feel silly and like, oh, it just reinforces the the turmoil that only I had to sit with, because it was like, oh great, I'm malfunctioning, I guess. Here I am again, just being some paranoid, um, the paranoid woman at home, just nothing better to worry about than this. I mean, I was really being quite unkind to myself inside of my own head, which just killed my sense of value. It just, because here I was like making these homemade soups and like beautifying the gardens and just trying to do everything to make, you know, to earn my keep, I guess, to make my value loud and clear, because I was essentially being made to feel like I didn't have any. Like, and not only that, I was being made to feel like I was just some, oh God, I don't even know. It felt so low. I felt absolutely worthless. And I didn't know what to do with that, because the value that I brought is the same value that I bring now when nobody's here. And it's always been one of nurturing and sort of considering the whole, considering the collective, except in this sense, it was the family unit. And sometimes it would be friends too. And thinking about helping as needed, what I could do to make the whole run smooth, and it's funny because when when it finally came out, again, based on my own discovery, just catching him on the phone at like 3 a.m. one night, standing in the gym, even then it was like, even then it was still like this resistance on his part to just do what it is that, he seemed to want to do, which was leave. And it was like I was still expected to just like deal with it. It was so strange. Like he had gotten so used to me just being this emotional doormat, like just this person that it's almost like, why don't you do this, or why don't you stop being like this? It was almost like I would feel depressed and almost like, having trouble getting out of bed, having trouble, everything just felt like some cinder blocks on my feet. But here I was still trying to push myself to do this much more, that much more, and to stop being so needy. And by needy, it was just like looking for reassurance, because my intuition was telling me like something is off. And even at my like lowest performing self, my most insecure self last year, my intuition was spot on. And so it's been a really painful thing to, especially the more I've gotten my confidence back up this year and in therapy, sometimes you just feel just like you can't believe it. You revisit these scenarios, and sometimes you'll just be going about your life, and then something will just come into your head, just something so benign, and all of a sudden, in hindsight, something will make sense. And then you'll just, having not thought about that person, sometimes for weeks, you'll just be placed in some scenario, and then all of a sudden, some event from last year it'll click. You'll immediately understand why something fell off, and you'll put the pieces together right there because you're into, everything's intact now, um, including your sense of self-worth and your sense of inner authority. And then the anger comes. And so I also want to talk about, just in case anyone's watching and they think, if you've experienced anything similar, if I come across as all kumbaya, well, let me just go ahead and assure you, it's taken all year to be able to talk about this in a constructive way. So I want you to know that don't feel bad if you are still in the rage stage. I mean, I don't know. I think what I hope to also make clear as we keep going, especially through the winter months where the days are shorter and the feelings can get heavier, at least for me, I realized that expenditure wasn't just some passive thing. It doesn't matter if I had every right to feel this rage, that way, whatever, because one thing I've heard more than once is you're better than me. People have said that, and I totally believe them, because honestly, if it was reversed and someone else was having this story and I was just hearing about it, I would say the exact same thing. I'd be like, "You're better than me." I would have taken a baseball bat to his windshield, and I would have done put the clothes in the fire pit. I've heard all of those things, and those are people's most honest reactions. Like, most people are actually surprised at the restraint that I have displayed. And as I said in my Mars, in the Little Tree That Could video, well, that's actually just my nature. I mean, don't get me wrong, I said some things, and I stand by those things. But I actually still, in hindsight, surprised myself about what I was able to restrain from doing. And not even in like a destructive sense, but that thing I said about no more than necessary to do the thing. That's always been my personality. I act with a measured hand, and especially once I have found myself at a moment of equilibrium between what my intuition has been telling me and what now my intellect provides for me in the form of rational proof, like evidence. That was the first, that was the closest to the High Priestess I had been in a while, because here I was now it all made sense. It felt, it was heartbreaking, but it was like, okay, well, now we're getting somewhere. Now I know that I am not, it's not faulty wiring in me. It's not, there's no problem with the mechanics of the messages that I am being given on the inside. There's no problem there. Now it's what to do with that. And so once I was given that new truth, and then as time progressed, even more new truths that just made the whole thing even more grotesque, the more I found out, actually. All the times that I was made to feel a certain way, the whole time they had already been sleeping together, like all year. And I realized, like, for the first time, I now had a choice to no longer be a member of this love triangle. And that's also, that was a big part of the anger, is that out of everyone involved, I was the only one that was put in it involuntarily. Everyone else knew there was a love triangle except for me. And so, having spent all of 2022 just trying to be a good fiance and be a team player, supportive partner, because I thought that it was just me and my fiance who was having a hard time at work. And if I asked him a question after this long, you know, he's not just going to keep blatantly telling me no. And if he wanted out, he was the one with all the maneuvering power as the one making the money, and, with the ability to leave home, go to his office, and in hindsight, do more than just work, as it turns out. I didn't. I wasn't going to track him. I wasn't going to follow him to his office. I'm not. Maybe it's some more shaky, immature stage of our relationship. Like, say we're like 2 years in, and we are both just sort of like, way more immature. And I don't know. Maybe that version of me would have put a little tracker in his car or something. But, like, when you're engaged and own a house together and you're damn near 2 decades in, you're going to be direct and ask a question, and then you're going to take the person's answer. So, once I had the new truth, I guess, and then more and more new truths, that was that. I mean, I spent 2022 in the fight and suffering, and I knew that there was nothing left to fight for, because this person, these two people, had engaged in this affair, knowing damn well I was there at home. And, there was no sign beyond just being treated poorly, to be honest. And outward signs of stress from him, that we were not romantic partners anymore. And that's what really feels enraging, honestly, in hindsight, is because it wasn't even like an estrangement in the romantic, physical sense in that way. There was no, like, oh, well, they had since, essentially just been roommates and nothing more for a year or two. And even then, that kind of betrayal is not excusable. But what it essentially boiled down to is somebody having a double life. They were taking from two different people, and two of those people knew that it was a three-party situation the whole time. And so once I finally had that knowing, and I had the choice to get off the ride, well, I was going to get off the ride. And so anyone that says, well, you're better than me, I would have done this and that, or I would have contacted her and told her this and that, and if she had known this and that, she wouldn't want anything to do with it. I mean, what's the point of that, honestly? And it takes a lot of restraint, I have to say. But once I, again, tapped back in, once I knew my intuition was, valid, and I felt validated in that way that I had just been so thirsty for all year, then I could really lean in to the intellect part. I could set aside the feelings to do what a person in my position should do. And that's where that left brain was allowed to take the driver's seat. My intuition had done what it was supposed to do. And so then it was time to make the decision. Are you going to become energetically further enmeshed in this situation? Or are you going to take that energy, because it is energy, it is all raw energy, good, bad, whatever, it's all energy. And so there was plenty of it, and it was mostly bad. Um, Intellectually, I said to myself that I was going to pour it all back into myself. I was going to transmute it, alchemize it into something of use for me, for my future. And I didn't care how long it took, but I was going to turn the pain into purpose. And I had no idea how that would happen, but the very first step, once I had that intuition confirmed, once my inner high priestess got the validation that honestly, now a version of the version of me that exists now wouldn't need the confirmation, wouldn't need to open the gym door at 3 a.m. and see on the phone. My inner high priestess had done her job the whole time, even at my very lowest vibration, lowest confidence levels all last year. She was doing her job the whole time. So now it was time for the intellect, the Queen of Swords, which we'll cover in another video. We got plenty of time. Swords are thoughts, rationality, intellect, communication. It was time for the Queen of Swords to take the wheel, at least for purposes of turning pain into purpose, because that was going to require every lesson, every skill, every tool that I had in my toolbox of life up until this point. It took all of those things. And it's still work, but in that immediate aftermath, I did not leave any tool unused. I really pulled everything I had out of myself and was determined to turn the pain into purpose. And I knew that if I let the behaviors of these two people turn me into something that I didn't recognize, I wouldn't be able to change that. I wouldn't be able to turn. That's just, I don't think anyone would blame me if I had done, called her up and given me her a piece of my mind, or told her this or that. That's not what it was about, though. It was about, how am I going to create something for myself, and keep the momentum of someone that is acting from a position of nurturance and love, like what I tried to pour into the relationship last year. How was I going to keep the momentum going and become the beneficiary of it, so that I could then pour it out to others? And so that's how this whole project was born. It was a realization. There's a quote, I'm sure there's many different versions of it, but it's something like, grief is essentially just love with nowhere to go. And if you really sit with that, you realize how true it is, and how, unlike when somebody dies that you loved, the love doesn't have to go anywhere. Their physical body is no longer here, and that itself is excruciating. I understand, I've been there, but the love lives on, and that's one of the best things about true love. The love I have for my grandfather and my grandmother, that love still exists, it remains. But when you grieve the living, well, yeah, that was very much grief. That was actually just love with nowhere to go. And so, instead of holding that love, I had to just sort of redirect it and sort of double down, um, in terms of self-love, self-care, and really stepping up my game in terms of how I showed up for myself, so that I could then somehow, um, have my pitcher filled up enough, so to speak, to be able to hopefully fill up the cups of others who needed it, who could use one good example, one solid voice of somebody who was saying things that they just maybe didn't think that they were supposed to say or allowed to feel. Um, and so this whole project is what I hope um, does that. I hope this finds people, and I hope to make the videos timeless because everyone's on a different timeline. So the beauty of putting it out there on the internet is that it will always be there for whoever needs it. Um, but for those of you that don't know about moonflowers, the thing about moonflowers that makes them special is that they bloom at night. Um, and so I guess if you want to bring back in the beauty of the plant world and mirroring the human experience and the metaphors just so readily writing themselves is if you find yourself in this space of darkness, having your little journey into the underworld, um, and sitting in that duality, trying to find the equilibrium, like the high priestess, like she sits in between, sitting in the dark, comfortably in that space in a perfect balance. The thing is, you, like the moonflower, in bloom in darkness. Sometimes it takes being placed in that darkness to really see how bright your light is, to see how magnificent your your inner gift or gifts, purpose, light, to really actually see it. Sometimes you have to sit in the dark and then you see how faintly it's glowing and then it becomes brighter and brighter, and then before you know it, you have this new energy, this new vibration to you. You have a confidence that you didn't know could even be mustered, let alone in the murkiest, darkest of circumstances. So if you've found yourself wondering where the name of this came from, the Moonflower Collective is for those out there that find themselves in some period of darkness. Uh, Here we are, quite literally entering into the darkest part of the year, but even just in the symbolic sense of your life, just know that this whole project was born out of a love for you people specifically and for a desire to hopefully be a whatever sort of guiding light I can be, um, and guiding light as in just someone to share my experiences and hope that you can extract something useful from them because you already have your own light. You don't need me. You have to cultivate your light because it is there. I just want to make sure you know that you too can bloom in darkness. I hope that all of you remember that even if you can't see a way right now, you have it in you. You just have to decide that that is going to be your path. You don't have to see even the step in front of you. Sometimes when it's dark, you just literally can't see your hand in front of your face when it's the darkest. So don't worry about that. Just decide once you realize that your intuition, here's your confirmation right now, that your inner high priestess is doing the work, whether you realize it or not. Once you make the decision that you are going to turn pain into purpose, the universe will have a way of conspiring to help you do that. And it's going to be different for everyone. But just know that there is a way. So just never give up on yourself. In fact, double down on yourself. Have have the audacity to declare yourself the most valuable thing in your life because you are. have the audacity to say, whatever money that person has or whatever possessions that person has, this or that, you are your most valuable resource. And let the universe take it from there. So I hope that you will take the energy of this full moon eclipse in Taurus and understand that you can set a new paradigm for yourself. And I encourage you to do that. And you decide what the value system is, and then you live by it. On that note, I do hope you have a good night's sleep tonight, wherever you are. And I hope you wake up tomorrow feeling a little bit more confident in your ability to finish out this year strongly. But also with the confidence knowing that even if you're all alone and you just kind of are going to have a hermit like remainder to your year, go within, you've got everything you need. Take care of yourselves. Until next time.